Sharbani Banerjee Mukherjee. Are you there? Yeah, kindly unmute yourself, ma'am.
Yeah.
Welcome to the webinar, online session of this webinar. And Berhampur University welcomes you and wishes you a very happy Women's Day. You are one of the most dynamic women I have met. And we are all eagerly waiting to listen to you.
Thank you so much. I think you are too kind. And I take this opportunity to thank Berhampur University in general and the Department of English in particular and Dr. Shruti Das, a great academic and a friend, for giving me this opportunity. It is always a special joy to speak on Women's Day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. I request my colleague, Dr. T. Ishwar Rao, to give a formal introduction to Dr. Sharbani Banerjee Mukherjee.
Okay, thank you, madam. Good afternoon, all. Respected head of our department, Dr. Shruti Das, madam. And today, even the talk respected Dr. Sharbani Banerjee Mukherjee, and respected Dr. Bharwat Tripathi, sir, and respected Anil, sir, and my dear students. I welcome you all to this grand event of International Women's Day celebration. It is a day to break the stereotypes associated with women over the ages and applaud their achievements in true sense. This is my honor privilege that I have been endowed with this opportunity of introducing Dr. Sharbani Banerjee Mukherjee. He is an associate professor at the postgraduate department of English at TDB College, Raniganj under Kazi Nazrul University, West Bengal, India. She has completed her graduation and masters in English from Viswabharati University, Santiniketan, where she was the university topper. She has written her PhD thesis on Lawrence Durrell's The Alexandria Quack. She has published a number of articles in journals of national repute. She has delivered lectures, webinars, and presented papers at all national and international seminars. Her areas of interest include American literature, post-British literature, post-colonial studies, and gender studies. She is co-editor of the American novel From Nathaniel Hawthorne to Heller and Cultural Context and Critical Perspectives, Macmillan Education 2019. She is associate editor of Literary Oracle, Department of English, Berhampur University, Odisha. She has written study material for Bardwan University publication for honors course, bridge course, and post-graduation course, and for Vidyasagar University publication for postgraduate courses. She has worked as UGC visiting fellow of English of postgraduate course at the Department of English, Sambalpur University since 2016. She is a peer of peer-reviewed online multidisciplinary journal of English studies titled Post-Spectrum. She is associate editor of the academic journal Literary Oracle published by the Department of English, Berhampur University, Odisha. She has acted as PhD evaluator and educator of the thesis of SRM University, Chennai, and Utkal University, Bhubaneswar. We really thankful to her for taking the time of her busy schedule to give a talk in today's national webinar. Madam, now I welcome Dr. Sharbani Banerjee, Madam, to start this session.
Ma'am, you have muted your mic. Please unmute.
Yes, yes. Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Ishwar Rao.
Kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you, Madam.
I have.
Yeah.
I have. It is a great honor and privilege to be here, especially on Women's Day. It makes our presence more important. And I enjoyed the morning session by Dr. Sanjay Mukherjee. What a wonderful webinar he presented. I hope that I can just add a little bit to his vast gamut of knowledge. So let me start. I think it is 5 minutes past 3. I just will take 1 minute of your permission to start a PowerPoint presentation. I hope let me see if all of you can see it properly. Can you see the screen? Can all of you see the screen?
Yes,
Yes.
madam.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
With your
ma'am. Thank
permission,
you.
I will be taking the camera off because it adds to a lot of net problems, and we will continue. What before I take off the camera, I just want to share with you what I'm about to do today in these few minutes that I have. I will try to focus not on one particular thing. My spectrum is lather, Raj, comfort, but I have tried to bring out the feminine resistance. My title is Feminist Resistance, a few textual markers over the ages. As we all know that the theoretization of literature and the complication of these numerous literary theories have problematized and complicated our life in the 20th century. But with the vision that they accorded us, with people like Foucault and Lacan, Bakhtin, and much later on the feminists like Ellen Sixtu, Simone de Beauvoir, Gayatri Chakraborty, Spivak, they have all sort of enlightened us to a new wave of thought by which we may be able to reassess and re-enumerate ourselves and our position in human civilization and in human society. So with those special visionary spectacles, we can go back right from the beginning of all creation and see how, though they were subjugated under a male-dominated society, under a patriarchal social structure, in their own silent, voiceless ways, women have tried to assert themselves, sometimes vocally, sometimes silently. But even those silent weapons are not of any mean merit. They are as strong as a fist or a box on the ears of patriarchy. So that is going to be my effort. I will be just, the canvas is vast and huge. I will just like Newton said, I will just be picking up pebbles on the way through, centuries and even millennia. And as I do so, I am sure that many such will come to your mind as well, and you will be able to add on to what I will be trying to say in your own ways, in your own writings, in your own studies. This, of course, I am directing only to the students here who are listening in. So let us begin where I want to begin. Let us begin where is the presentation visible? Is the screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. Do let me know whenever it goes off, because net is such a problem these days. So as I said, as you can see from the title of my paper is Feminist Perspectives, Feminist Resistance Through the Ages, a few milestones, just a few milestones. As I was telling you, the 20th century has complicated our life. How has it done so? Historically, the two world wars have devastated the world and have taken away the Victorian smile from our faces when the British did think that they were the most supreme, and it changed all the binaries and equations of human relationships and national and state relationships all across the world. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution created a major earthquake across the anthropological and the religious world as well. Because remember, all these years, the majority of the world that was Christian inclined in Christianity, they believed that Adam was an immaculate conception. Adam was a creation of God, and Eve was born out of the left rib of Adam. And so she looked upon Adam almost as her, demi-creator and a demigod. We do not see in Christianity any evidence of Adam playing like a small child, or Adam as a youngster, like we have see our gods, like Ram was young and a small child, and we have sung bhajans like Thumaka Chalata Ramachandra Bajata Penjaniya, and we see little Krishna whom we love as the Makhan Chor. So the evolutionary process in other religions has a marked difference to that in Christianity. Christianity is all about immaculate conceptions, about perfection of being from the moment of evolution. Now Darwin changed all that. He trashed it and he said that man has come from the apes, so we have to look upon the apes as our ancestors, so we are born out of monkeys. Another premise was destroyed. Freud's psychoanalysis completely, complicated our complex world. I'm being very alliterative today, because he taught us that what we say and what we do is just the tip of an iceberg. I will not go into the theory because we are all familiar with that. And Einstein, with his theory of relativity, he completely, made the world rootless by erasing all the fixity out of our conceptions. And after this, after the World War was in the postmodern age, with all the literary theories that came up, we learned lessons in perspective. Our perspective changed. Thus, when we talk about theories of feminism and of feminist resistance, we are looking at literature and history of social events mostly from the 20th century. Yet, when we read what Foucault, what Lacan, what Bakhtin, and even Spivak said about the eternal struggle between the powerful and the powerless in human society, we are able to travel back to the literature from all ages, times, and languages to reassess their context through modern, postmodern sensibilities. So that is what I will be trying to do in this talk. In his seminal work, The History of Sexuality, Volume 1, An Introduction, published in 1976, Foucault said that power is exercised rather than possessed. By that he meant that power is diffused throughout social institutions and is exercised by innumerable replicable functionaries as it works through a lot of capillaries of social systems. Since power has always generated repression, the subjugation of women may be mapped by following patriarchal social structures which secure the power of men over women. I will not be going deep into the concepts of feminism nor on the feminist discourse as propounded by Bakhtin, but it must be remembered that from the birth of literature, a cultural resistance has been in the sidelines to initiate a feminist monologic voice that would be the reversal of patriarchal voices. From then on, attempt was being made to allow the feminine voice to be evolved. If a monologic voice is impossible, like the concept of the Amazons, or a society only with women, because I remember Adrienne Rich said a very interesting thing in an interview when she was asked, do you hate the men and do you wish that the world was without men? And she said, what are you talking about? What would we do without the men? Whom would we quarrel with? So if a monologic discussion is not possible, it was, a dialogic discourse could have been initiated that would have resulted in a kind of positive multivocality. Yet even in the second half of the 20th century, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak had to question, that phenomenological question: can the subaltern speak? The voiceless othering of women to a peripheral, marginal existence is the politics of patriarchy. But to use that marginalized position and to reclaim the center is the silent strength of feminine resistance. That is exactly what I will be trying to do, to point out a few markers of these silent resistances. So, what I will be doing, the subordination of the woman's role in making the history and the imprisonment of by patriarchy and colonial forces, is what literature and women's writing have reflected through the ages. From a feminist point of view, patriarchy and colonialism are considered an archetypal evil because both of them automatically nurture totalitarianism and hegemonic beliefs. So in this brief discussion, I have just two aims that I have written out here. Number one, that subversion, dogmatism, domination, stifling of voices, commodification of the body and the soul have all been part of the androcratic politics of exclusion that have always debarred women from equal status in any civilization in the world. And yet, that is my second point, that despite this choking of voices and marginalizing women to an imagined periphery, women have, since time immemorial, found gaps and cracks to break out, sometimes loudly, often silently, to resist these unfair practices. Through their lives and actions, they have found ways to write back to the patriarchal hegemony that oppressed them through the ages. And as I said, I will be starting at the very beginning, and I have chosen some writers, and let us straight away, begin with those texts, because I will be beginning from the beginning of things. Let us consider let us consider the Vedas. In the Vedic times, there were a group of women who were called the Brahmavadinis. There was Vakambrini, there was Lopamudra, there was Shikta, there was Gargi, there was Ghosha, and there was Maitreyi. They all had an equal status vis-a-vis the rishis and the munis and the men who were creating and writing shuktas or slokas in the text. They were learned women, they were well versed in the Sanskrit language, and were allowed to compose shuktas or hymns. I will not be mentioning all of them. I have just mentioned their names, and I'm sure many of us know a lot about them. In particular, I want to mention Ghosha. Ghosha has an interesting trajectory because she suffered from some kind of skin ailment. People believe, though there is actually no proper record, but it was believed that she suffered from a kind of leprosy, because of which she could not marry and she could not begin the Garhastha life or the life of a family woman when she wanted. She prayed and prayed to the gods, and ultimately it was the Ashwini brothers who came to her help and cured her of her illness. So she has one Shukta or hymn in the 10th mandala of Rig Veda, where she is highly praising the Ashwini brothers for helping her out of her dilemma. At the point when she was not married and suffering from a kind of loneliness, she has another Shukta where she expresses her intimate feelings and desires for married life. She is talking about her needs of sexual intimacy and how she was suffering without them, and that she wanted that like anybody else. I am reminded of Helen Sixu and her essay, The Laugh of Medusa, where she has, this was written 2,500 years later, where she's inspiring women to write their body, about their body, and with their body. So 2,500 years ago, there are evidences of expression. I found a very interesting write-up This is by the name of the lady, the academician is Samhita Arni. She says that a couple of years ago, she finds a hymn in the Atharva Veda, hymn number 130. It is possibly, composed and written by a woman who is deep into the throes of love and has had a lover's quarrel. And she cries out and she says, let him be consumed with love for me, that he may think of me and that I may never think of him. Send forth the spell, gods, let him be consumed with love of me. And then she says, a pentagonic repetition, madden him, madden him, madden him, madden him, madden him. Almost like Wasteland, in Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, burning, 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 and burning. So, this is a kind of, an exaltation of passion and feeling by a woman at a time when even today, maybe 100 years ago, it was unthinkable. In this discussion, I am going to be, jumping in a sort of a time capsule. I am going to jump hemispheres all the time. So from the Vedas, I will go straight to Homer's epic. And Helen of Troy is a lady who has been much discussed and who has been, valorized by Christopher Marlowe in the Is This the Face That Launched 1,000 Ships? But in the Occidental epics, we find that it is more about the martial skill of men. It is more a patriarchal edict of the great, valors and acts of bravery that men have done. And yet the fall of Troy revolves around Helen, who was married to Menelaus as a political maneuver. She was not happy with her old husband. Though the people of Sparta projected Helen's defection to Troy as a case of abduction by Paris, there are other interpretive texts that say that Helen made her own choice when she fell in love with Paris and ran away. Her bold act may be interpreted as a revolt against politically adaptive marriages imposed by the androcratic world. The other notable resistance that I recall is that of Penelope, the wife of Ulysses. And I'm sure many of us have read stories about her, who waited for her husband for 20 long years because her husband was busy with the battle. The story goes that she was being pressurized by her male suitors, who were often getting angry and belligerent because they wanted to marry her. And in order to keep her safety and her country and state safe, she had to think of ploys of warding them off. She is remembered as an icon of marital fidelity, where she declared that she was weaving a shroud for her father-in-law and would marry as soon as that shroud was complete. And she would sit by the day weaving on her loom, and at night she would be opening out the threads so that the shroud was never complete. But after 3 to 4 years, this ploy did not work anymore, as people saw through her cleverness. She then proposed that she would marry that person who would be able to string and fix her husband's great bow. So with her grit, her determination, and intelligence, she tried to ward off the masculine advantages and was reunited with her husband 20 years later. Another hemispherical jump as I come to the Indian epics. And who does not know the plight of Sita? As I try to tell my students when I teach them feminism, and I tell them that Rama must have been a great king, a great prince, a great son, a great father, a great statesman, but he was not really a great husband, because Sita had been commodified repeatedly, not once, not twice, but a multiple times. And when at the end, fed up with these years of subjugation and commodification, she chose to reject the world that had rejected her and examined and questioned her chastity all the time. So her Patal Pravesh that we all know about is her ultimate protest against a male-dominated, male-politicized world. In Mahabharata, I will not talk about Draupadi, but that is because that is a different argument altogether. Neither will I speak of Gandhari or Kunti. But I would like to mention the central focus of a subplot within the main epic. When Arjuna has gone in his Agyatavas, he has to remain unidentified for a year. He travels up to Manipur and meets the Manipuri princess Chitrangada, who was nurtured like a prince, who wore men's garb, who was proficient in all the masculine skills and of warfare, and yet hid her femininity deep within her bosom. And she has been, valorized in a beautiful musical rhapsody by Rabindranath Tagore of the same name. And at the end of this, when Arjuna and Chitrangada are united, then Chitrangada, she declares, I will just, recite this in Bengali because I find it so beautiful, but I will also repeat what she said in English. She said in Bengali at the end, means I am the daughter of a king. I am a princess. Nohi Devi, Nohi Shamanna Nari. I am not a deity. I am not a Devi. Neither am I an ordinary woman. Puja kori more rakhibe urdhe she nohi nahi. If you want to deify me and put me on an altar and pray to me, I am not that. I don't want that from you. Hala kori more rakhibe piche she nohi nahi. If you want to neglect me, if you want to stamp your, boots upon myself and neglect me and denigrate me, I am not that either. Jodi parshe rakho more, if you keep me by your side, shantape shambhoge, in all your joys and your sorrows, share all your joys and sorrows with me. Sammati dao jodi kothino broter sahay hote. If you help me to, to share all your difficulties in your life, pabe tobe tumi chinite more, which means you will only recognize my worth. I think that is, this is one of the most fantastic definitions of what a woman is all about and of what a woman should be. I also remember Sappho, who is a Greek poet of the BC 6. She was born in 630 BC and she died in 570 BC. She was the first woman to express love and desire between women, one woman to another woman, on a sexual and passionate level. And that is why the words, sapphic and lesbian have come from her name. And the island where she inhabited, that was Lesbos. Another, forgotten woman today, Dr. Sanjay Mukherjee gave a fantastic lecture on the Renaissance women, the nuns, and so many other forgotten women who have, written and who have made their importance felt, but they have somehow been, covered up in the sands of time. Dhauda of Gascony is one such woman. Her story is very sad because though very little is known about her very early life, but she was married to Bernard of Septimania and had mothered two sons, William and Bernard. The edicts of history tell us that her husband was mostly busy in the battlefield, and she was a very lonely woman. Even her elder son, was taken away from her for the necessities of warfare, and even her younger son, Bernard, was snatched away from her cradle. Dhauda, in grief, she wrote a kind of a liber manualis that was titled a liber manualis for the students. It is a kind of a guide to living and a code of conduct, and she entitled it "A Letter for William." Even though she was denied the prerogative of nurturing her son, as most mothers do, in that ancient age of the 9th century, her manual for her son was her silent resistance. In these different ways, we have often come across so many such women. another very common name. I have chosen these very common persons because so that we can identify with them and realize what their role really was. That was Shahrazadeh of the Arabian Nights, or the 101 Nights of the famous Arabian stories that all of us have been brought up with when we were children. And we loved to hear the story of King Shahryar, who had been, a sort of, mm, he had been misused and deprived by one woman, betrayed by his wife, and he was very annoyed with, womanhood at large. So he took this promise and he married one virgin girl per night. By the day, spent one night with her, and next morning killed her. Shahrazadeh took the onus upon her, and she, tried to stop this bloodbath. She spun her creative web of stories that forced the king to keep her alive for 1001 nights, after which her stories had all exhausted. But by that time, the king's anger had dissipated, and he had fallen in love with his storyteller and made her his queen. What many of us are unaware is that in those constrictive days, Shahrazadeh had perused books, annals, legends of preceding kings, collected 1,000 books of histories related to ancient races and departed rulers, learned works of poets by heart, and also studied philosophy, science, arts, and was skilled in other accomplishments as well. She proved that she was sharper than the androcratic sensibility and used her creative powers, her wit, and her intelligence to win her freedom, attain the status of a queen, and also save her female fraternity from mass annihilation. This also is another example of how a woman can silently protest and change the world. What discussion can be complete without a mention of Shakespeare? Shakespeare's cross-dressing women have been famous because there are at least 10 to 12 such characters. We all know, even a graduate student knows that Shakespeare cleverly used this theatrical technique to make it more real on the stage, because in the Jacobean, especially in the Elizabethan phase, there were one or two female heroines, but especially in the Jacobean era, post 1603, women were not allowed to, enact on the stage. And young, beautiful boys, pretty young lads whose beards had not yet grown so much, were used on the stage for women. So Shakespeare uses this reality very cleverly. But the characters use their cross-dressing, their complicated gender roles to gain positions of success and positions of victory, such as Portia. She was dressed as a doctor as she uses her sharp metal to checkmate Shylock and free Bassanio. She also, in this way, gains position and power, from where she acquires the right to reprimand Bassanio for giving her ring away to the doctor with impotation and defiling her strata. Rosalind is again a character whom we have all studied in our graduation level. She took the shape of the dress of Ganymede, Job's own page, in order to ensure her own safety and that of her cousin, Celia. At the Forest of Arden, she makes good use of this change of dress by gaining the freedom to reorient Orlando in the ways of love. And when she is able to bring everything to its climax and to an acceptable solution, they all revert back to their old models. So As You Like It is a play, not really as the epilogue. In the epilogue, Rosalind says that as you like it, by that she's trying to mean refer to the audience, but it is actually as Rosalind liked it, because the whole play is dancing to her tune. Viola is also another such woman, but she is slightly discomfited in her role as Cesario in Twelfth Night, because Olivia falls in love with her, just as Phoebe had fallen in love with Rosalind. But in all these three plays, when the gender confusion is ultimately resolved, the protagonists of the respective play, especially the male protagonists, have no option but to praise these strong women characters who threw caution to the winds and were able to navigate the patriarchal world in the manner that they wished, thereby recording their resistance. There have been other strong women in Shakespeare's gamut of plays who did not cross-dress. How can we forget Lady Macbeth? How can we forget the other Portia in Julius Caesar, as also Cleopatra in Antony and Cleopatra? They have all been very strong women. But we should not make the mistake to think that Shakespeare was a feminist. This is just by the way and off the track of my discussion here, that Shakespeare had some very sexist remarks to make in his plays as well, especially when we read Othello in Act 2, Scene 2. Iago refers to the women, come on, you are pictures out of doors, bells in your parlors, wild cats in your kitchens, saints in your injuries, devils being offended, players in your housewifery, and housewives, and sorry, I have made a printing error there. It should be hussies in your beds. This word hussies in your beds reminds me of a Bengali saying that I have heard from grandmothers, from our grandmothers. When we were very young and our grandmothers were trying to teach us how to be a perfect woman in this world. And by this world, I'm sure they meant the patriarchal world. They gave us a magic equation. And what was the magic equation? They said, a woman in the morning must be a sweeper or a servant, play the role of a sweeper or a servant. By that, it meant that you should be cleaning, sweeping and swabbing, washing clothes, washing utensils, cleaning up your house, and making it very perfect and habitable. By afternoon, she must play the role of a mother. By that, she will be bathing and feeding her children, taking their care, showering them with love and affection, because that is the only time that they will get. Other times, they are busy with the household work. And at night, they must be harlots or whores in bed. Remember, this is a Bengali saying. And Hussies in Your Beds by Shakespeare in the very early, maybe 17th century. And in 19th century Bengal, said by the women themselves that was the kind of marginalization of women, where they were expected to play the role of these things. Even Taming of the Shrew, where Bianca and Catherine have to be tamed, just as horses and animals have to be tamed. And there are ample references where women are referred as, almost similar to dogs in the way they should be treated, in the way they should be fed, in the way they should be patted on the head occasionally, and of course made use of by night. Shakespeare was born in 1564. I am again taking a leap to our part of the hemisphere and mentioning Mirabai. He was born, some people say 1498, there are references to 1502. And she died in 1556, just in the timeline of the world, she's just a predecessor to Shakespeare. Who was Mirabai? She was, again, I have chosen a very common person whom we all know about. She was a Rajputani. She was a Rajasthani princess and a Rajasthani queen. In the most restrictive era of the Middle Ages, when Mughal sensibility had initiated and popularized the Parda system in India, Mirabai chafed and fretted in a marriage where her soul was absent. She often escaped the boundaries of her palace and the restrictions of Parda, singing paeans of love for Lord Krishna. Even though the hagiographic importance of her creations attracts more attention, her feminist resistance does not go unnoticed. Even as a wife and a widow of a king, she sang boldly, Mere to giridhara gopala dusaro na koi, jaake sira mora mukuta mero pati soi. I have highlighted the word pati. In those restrictive times, in times when it was, blasphemous for a woman even to show her face because she had to be under the ghungat or the parda. Here is a woman, though it is, it is that universal love between, nature and the creator, between man and God. But even then, to imagine her God as her husband and to sing out passionate, songs and bhajans in his praise and running out on the streets was a kind of writing back. Bahinabai was another such woman. Of course, she was a little post Mirabai. She was not of Mirabai's time, but a little later. She was born in 1628 and she died in 1700. She was a Varkari female saint and a disciple of Sant Tukaram. She was subjected to verbal and physical abuse by her husband, who despised her spiritual inclinations. In one of her own Abhangas, she laments, "The Vedas cry loud, the Puranas shout, no good may come to woman. How am I to attain truth? They are foolish, seductive, and deceptive. Any connection with a woman is disastrous." The last line is very, very familiar to that line where in the Old Testament of the Bible it is said that man that is born of a woman is for a few days and full of misery, because woman had, initiated the phenomenology of sin in the ancient world and transformed all human beings into sinners. I jump back to the Occidental world and bring up now a few other avenues of resistance that women had contrived when they were not in a position to occupy center stage and be vocal about their protests. Most of us have read A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, and Madame Defarge is a fearsome character in that, where though she's innocuously knitting all through the novel, yet her knitting and dropping of loops forms the list of black-marked anti-revolutionaries who are to be executed. Like Shakespeare, Dickens's dichotomy is revealed also when he describes the guillotine as the figure of a sharp female. But on a metaphoric level, the knitting constitutes a symbol in itself, representing the stealthy, cold-blooded vengefulness of the revolutionaries, and Madame Defarge's knitting thus becomes a symbol of her victim's fate, death at the hands of a wrathful peasantry. And yet, she really does not speak much, and she does not, act much. But her knitting itself becomes a symbol of terror to all those who know her. Another famous, again, I'm going back to the histories, and Philomela's protest in response when Tereus raped her mercilessly. In response to Tereus's efforts to censor her, Philomela weaves a tapestry to communicate the crime of Tereus to her sister Procne, who was Tereus's wife. She responds to the tyrannical power and overcomes the attempt to censor her. This bold act recalls Arachne, who weaves a tapestry depicting the ways in which gods abused mortals. We all know the story of Philomela and how Procne was so angered that she killed their only son, Tereus's and Procne's son, and cooked his meat for food to her husband. But he got angered and he tried to kill the two sisters when the gods had to intervene and changed them into birds. Philomela famously was changed into a nightingale, thereby giving her a voice, indirectly, symbolically, giving her a voice that she had engineered through the tapestry that she had woven. Weaving also reminds me of Salman Rushdie's famous magic realistic novel, Shame. And in Shame, there are many important characters. The central character is that of Sufia Zenobia. Her resistance is of another kind, but I will not go into it because the time is pressing upon us. I just want to mention Rani Harappa. She is a minor character in the play. She is, she was the wife of Iskandar Harappa. Shame is a novel for those who are uninitiated in the novel. It is a magic realistic novel that is based on the minefield of the political scenario of Pakistan. And Iskandar Harappa is an echo of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And Iskandar Harappa is a politically, active person who keeps his wife in his homestead in Harappa. She's a neglected woman who is not happy with all the privileges and the corruption that her husband is taking recourse to. So she begins to, embroider shawls. She embroidered 17 shawls. She devotes her embroidered narratives to the pain inflicted by Iskandar on the country generally and to her in particular. There were 17 shawls in all, one of which was termed the torture shawl, complete with corrupt policemen clad ominously in white and illustrations of various techniques used to suppress political dissidents. And Rani's shawls become increasingly allegorical. As her shawls become increasingly allegorical in design, her last pieces concern the apocalypse, marked in the shawl of hell by the multitudes of bodies perished. Rani commented in the novel once that I have lost count of the bodies on my shawl. So when these women, they did not have a voice, when they were the voiceless other, they they create, they sculpt a voice of their own that could be silent. It was almost like the force of laughter in a carnival that Bakhtin has popularized in his carnivalesque theory. Hester Prynne is another such character, female character, in Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter. She was a damned woman. She needed to be punished because she was the very symbol of adultery. And it was imposed upon her to wear the letter A upon her breast, to tell the world that she was an adulteress. But the statement of her revolt was that she crafted that square piece of cloth with the letter A, with such luxurious and glorious stitches, with red and gold threads in intricate designs, that it stood out like a beacon on her breast to mock at the patriarchal hegemony of the Puritans of New America. They averred that the symbol was not mere scarlet cloth tinged in an earthly dye pot, but was red hot with infernal fire and could be seen glowing all alight whenever Hester Prynne walked abroad in the night time. Remember, night time, it glowed even in the night. And we must needs say it seared Hester's bosom so deeply that perhaps there was more truth in the rumor than our modern credulity may be inclined to admit. So her letter and the way she stitched it, and the way she wore it, and the way she kept herself on the periphery of the Dominion, did not choose to accept defeat, but began the supplier and the seamstress of the whole locality, and became their sort of, soothing, impassioned voice when they were sick or dying. She herself made herself the center, though she had been placed in a position of marginality. That was Hester Prynne. Another silent revolt was Ritu, the wife of Inder Lal, in Jhoot Prav Jhabwala's famous novel Heat and Dust. Many of you may have seen the fantastic movie where Shashi Kapoor was the Indian prince. It is the story of a young British wife who comes with her husband in British India, in the small princely state of Sitapur, where the prince is a very charismatic person, and somehow the prince and this British woman are embroiled in, and they get involved with each other. And when the woman is pregnant, she's not sure whether she will give birth to a blue-eyed child or a black-eyed child, because she is not really sure of the paternity of her child, and she flees the country, the area. The prince keeps her in some hill state, could be Shimla. And her step-granddaughter Olivia comes in the modern days to search for her grandmother's history. And who helps this lady is an Indian person by the name of Inderlal. Ritu is a very small character in Inderlal, in this Heat and Dust. She is a woman who suffers bouts of hysteria. She is a neglected housewife who is ignored by her husband. And as she can sense that Inderlal is getting involved with this Firang lady, with this Western girl, her bouts of hysteria increase. And she has terrible bouts of screaming and raving and ranting. A psychoanalytical interpretation will tell us that this was her ploy to gain attention even while she was neglected. It is also pertinent to remember that the hysteria in Ritu grew as Inderlal became physically involved with the narrator of the story. So this is, Ritu is, I like to compare her to the mad woman in the attic in Jane Eyre, who was much valorized much later as an important icon of neglect and silencing. Ritu is one such character, and her hysteria. And I am sure, in our vernacular literature, whether it is Oriya, whether it is Bengali, whether it is Hindi, we find numerous examples of such, examples of hysteria that was prevalent in those times. And in this, I come straight now, in another 2 or 3 minutes, I will complete my paper, that in the modern times, when there was no need to be, silently vocal, when vocality and voice was given to the women, confessional poets like Sylvia Plath and Sexton and our very own Kamala Das, they deserve mention only because they dared to open the imaginary doors of the closet of their psyche and come out into a man's world where a woman had to be subdued, marginalized, silenced, and other, to the extent that they could not resist or register their protest. While the resistance was silent and overt, contrived in the ancient and Middle Ages, in the modern and postmodern era, they protested loudly, without any qualms or shame. I end this talk with a mention of Draupadi Mejen in Mahashita Devi's Draupadi, whose revolt was open as she walked out naked in the open world after being gang raped through the night. She remains a symbol of subaltern defiance. She subverts the physicality of her body from powerlessness into a powerful resistance. Thank you. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sharbani Mukherjee, for the brilliant lecture spanning over almost the entire gamut of literature and history. We are really impressed. It must have been really hard work on your part. Thank you so much. It was an extremely brilliant lecture.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to speak on the Women's Day. And resistance is something that is close to a woman's heart, and that is all that she can do, because she cannot go to war, so she can only resist, whether it is passive or active. And thank you, Dr. Mukherjee, for having given us a wonderful canvas. Over to you, participants. Would you like to answer some questions from the participants?
Of course, sure, that will be a pleasure.
So over to you, participants. Kindly ask Dr. Mukherjee some questions. I'm sure you're all aching to ask questions because this is something that is very close to people's heart. And then, men and women think about feminism from different perspectives. So she has actually clarified a lot of doubts in the way of a speech. So I think Dr. Tripathi, Balabhadra Tripathi, my colleague, has some question to ask. I guess there are some questions in the chat box. Dr. Balabhadra Tripathi, do you want to ask some questions?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I can see the question. You talked about the silent resistance of women. What about the radical feminism of today? As I said, I just sort of touched on Adrian Rich right at the beginning of when I was talking. Radical feminism is, of course, it is the need, it was the need of the day. Without the radical feminism, where would we all be today? I mean, it is the modern, as I told you, that the 20th century has opened our eyes to the realities and the necessities of a unified process and a protest. And when we go back and sort of we follow the trajectory of feminism, we have the first wave, the second wave, the third wave, the fourth wave. We have ecofeminism, cyberfeminism, womanism, every avenue, and you will find that gradually, as adult franchise, the right to suffrage and the right to be vocal, they all began to open our doors. Radical feminism was necessary to stop the grinding wheels of patriarchy to a certain extent. It is never complete, it is never over, because of course, again, I told you, it is the struggle between the powerful and the powerless. But when the radical feminism was an effort to make the women feel that they are not powerless at all, they are indeed powerful, and that they had to use the power in their veins in order to hit back and to gain their own position. So radical feminism is absolutely very, very relevant today and to about 60 years from before today.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There is a question from Ujjani Sinha Roy in the chat box. Do you think resistance is enough, adequate?
Of course not. Resistance is just the first baby step, the step out of the cradle. That is why I say that resistance, the mostly I have, as you have seen, that I have not gone into the 20th century at all. I have spoken of the time when the women did not have the tools in their hands to resist, when they did not have the pen in their fingers, they did not have paper before them. In most cases, not in all. Today, Dr. Shanja Mukherjee has given a wonderful edit of how women in the Renaissance period have been writing within themselves. But resistance is not just enough. The necessity of today is to eke out new avenues. And it is not just about the women also. Today we are doing gender studies. What about the LGBTQ? Everybody is fighting for their own rights. And just resistance is not enough. A creation of awareness and a modification of the preconceived definitions are also necessary in order to, make the world truly dialogic.
Well, so did you say that, is that the reason why you said burning, 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 burning when you were quoting
Yes.
T.S. Eliot?
Absolutely.
You were talking with that. Are the women still burning, burning, burning? And
they are still
how
burning.
long will they be burning and how long will they be resisting?
That depends on how long we choose to, not step out of the of the preconceived notion that woman is biologically weak, therefore she is psychologically weak. And a woman's today nobody says that the woman's place is in the house and in the kitchen. That definition has now flown out of the window. So that is one positive step towards a a more or less an equal world. But only burning is not enough. Creating our own special areas. And that is why, lectures like you have organized are so important, because I saw a vast body of young children behind you listening eagerly. So it is these young minds that we have to sort of modulate and infect in a manner that they choose to think themselves to be equal. No boy will dishonor a woman, and no woman will dishonor herself.
Thank you very much. You have been speaking from your talk has spanned from Shakespeare to present day or even beyond. So I have identified some kind of resistance and feminism in the wife of Bath in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales.
Yes.
Well, but you said that some of Shakespeare's characters, when they are cross-dressing, and they have because they have complicated gender roles. So what do you mean by that exactly? How complicated were the gender roles then, and how are they not now? And how has Shakespeare's cross-dressing actually answered this kind of dilemma of complicated gender roles?
Thank you. That was a wonderful question. And that is something that we keep, discussing and we keep thinking about. That, see, Shakespeare had, as I had stated while I was speaking, that Shakespeare had a practical difficulty to overcome when he was, transforming his women and dressing them in men's garbs. But the plot of the plays were such that he makes fantastic use of that complication of gendering by allowing the women, or by showcasing the power of the women. But what complicates this is, as I told you, that Viola as Cesario becomes very an attractive proposition for Olivia, and Rosalind as Ganymede becomes an attractive proposition for Phoebe, where Sylvius is in love with her. Now, this I like to, and we all know, those of us who have studied Shakespeare, that even people have questioned Shakespeare's gender conceptualization from some of his sonnets. And remember, his choosing the name of Ganymede for Rosalind is also very, very symbolic, because Ganymede was Jove's own page. But Jove had actually abducted Ganymede, because he was such a pretty little lad, abducted him to heaven and sodomized him and made him his lover and his slave. Ganymede was the cupbearer of Jove. So you see, there are overt influences of gender complications in Shakespeare in many cases. As far as Portia and Merchant of Venice is concerned, it was her necessity to change herself to bring her husband out of the dilemma. For Rosalind, she says, in a world, remember when she is preparing to go out with Celia into the big bad world, out of the palace of Duke Ferdinand, she says that we will hide our woman's heart within our my doublet and my hose will, belie the woman's heart within me. So not at any point of time does she, tell us that she is very happily a male. She is doing it for the necessity of the situation, as Portia is doing, as Viola is doing. And another interesting thing is that if you read those plays carefully, after the plays are over, after the complications are resolved, these characters who have cross-dressed and ached out a passage for themselves and resolved so many things, they have become sort of, the dominant factor of the plays. They come back to the patriarchal accepted mode of society, wear their gowns and become happily wives of their husbands or mistresses of their lovers, and they revert back to the patriarchal world that they had dominated. So Shakespeare confuses matters a lot.
Thank you. Brilliantly answered. Thank you so much. There is another question by Sonam Devta. Why is not a woman's experience considered adequate enough to form an opinion of her own? Why isn't her view considered complete? Why is a woman's intelligence dismissed over a man's intelligence? On the practicality of the world, how can literature help us deal with this problem? Wow.
Thank you, Sonam. It is very good to see you here. Now, what I think to so many questions, I have one answer, and that is why I said burning, 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 because that is what we women are always shouting about. We say that why not a woman's experience considered adequate enough to form an opinion of her own? Of course it is. That is, I said that because they had the opinion of their own, they chose to, find the cracks and loops and holes in the androcratic social order and register their resistance. Her opinion, what is her opinion? I told you about Ramayana. Sita's opinion was that she has had enough of this world. And that is why her experience in Ram Rajya made her take that strong decision and call upon Mother Earth, divide the world into two, and enter into the comforting lap of Mother Earth. So, in other words, if we do not take it metaphorically and if we take her seriously, then she is leaving this world. She's committing suicide. She's rejecting her life based upon the answer to my answer to your question A. Let me see, what is your next question? Why isn't her view considered complete? It is not considered complete because women were never considered to be good enough. If you read the history of American literature, you will find that a group of educated American women would come together, and because they had worn blue stockings on one occasion, women were lampooned as blue stockings, those women who were educated. Even in Bengal, when women, not today, but some years ago even, when women were getting highly educated, their fathers and mothers were called and said that, do you want to turn your daughter into a Vidyasagar? So these were all, sarcastically commented upon. So that is why her view is not considered complete by whom? By those that she is protesting against, the patriarchal order. Why is a woman's intelligence dismissed over a man's intelligence on the practicality of the world? It is up to a woman not to accept that dismissal. You just have to prove that they are wrong and you are right. Who is anybody to dismiss any other body unless they themselves consider themselves to be incomplete, inferior, marginalized? It is how you look at the situation. And if you are looked down upon, you choose to revolt and go away from there. How can literature help us deal with this problem? Literature is an eye-opener, where in literature, when you see Draupadi, she is in love with Arjun, but she has to accept 5 husbands. When, despite her sacrifice, when their life is coming to an end, it is Draupadi who is Draupadi who dies first. Why? Her crime being that though she was married to 5 men, she loved Arjun only. So literature tells us what to do. Literature also shows us what not to do. Literature also teaches us not to be the mad woman in the attic. And literature also teaches us to be a Joan of Arc or a Hester Prynne.
That was very nicely answered, but I think...
Hello?
That is, I think, a patriarchal way of telling the women don't do. Okay, if you do, you're going to face this. But that should be a choice.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
If it's my choice to jump into the well, I might commit suicide. Whatever happens is the consequences
Yes.
also mine.
Yes.
So why should we be escapists?
Yes.
So that is the problem with women, because they go half the way and they're so used to their comfort zones that the resistance stops there. They want to resist, and when they leave their comfort zones, it becomes uncomfortable. They immediately turn around and want cushions.
Exactly. Exactly.
You want equal rights, and at the same time, you will not let a senior citizen sit in your seat in the bus or the
Yes.
train. You want to sit down. If you're old and ailing, it's another issue. Or if you have some discomfort, it's an issue. But young women should also be like, you want equality. Equality
Absolutely.
is not that a little more.
True, true, true. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Any other questions? I think Dr. Tripathi is there, Sabita Tripathi and Aloka, they're all there. So I don't really know. Are you there, ma'am? Sabita ma'am?
Yeah.
I think Sabita ma'am
Oh,
would like
it's
to
a
say
wonderful.
something.
This
Everybody
is
has
a
to
wonderful.
listen